Tamam.
Hello, welcome. Welcome to this, the second part of our seminar series with Assistant Professor Dr. Juan. We started.
Yes.
We started.
Yep.
Okay. Welcome to the second part of our seminar series with Assistant Professor Dr. Juan Castrillón. Today, Juan will talk about his title of his talk is a Sonic Spirituality in Istanbul, Perspectives from a Colombian Ethnomusicologist. And for those of you who were there last week, Juan delivered a talk about his studies in the music of the indigenous music of Colombian Amazon. He delivered his studies there, and today we're going to Istanbul. Seems like.
Yeah.
But for those of you who don't know Juan, I'm gonna just have a very brief introduction. He's an ethnomusicologist and a cultural anthropologist and filmmaker, and I would like to add the musician here as well, and an academic, of course. He was with us for 3 semesters in Cyprus in the Arukat University, and I feel fortunate to have worked with him. And I have certainly gained new perspectives from him. And quite strangely, actually, because he kind of acted like a mirror for my own culture, actually. I was able to see my own culture through his eyes, and that was an interesting experience for me. So Juan, are we going to do like a Q&A session here, or would you like to deliver your talk? Did you prepare a presentation?
Yeah, I prepare a presentation, but because I am remotely, I also would like to have a more interactive session, um, if we have time and if that's okay with all of you.
Yes, of course.
Okay, good. So, um, so let me begin with my presentation, in which I have like an introduction. Then I can pause my introduction and we can have a more dialogic interaction, so that students will feel more relaxed and 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 less distant, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. So hello everyone, and again I apologize for my delay. Um, so yeah, this week we're going to Istanbul, and as Inal just said, um, we go through my perspective, right? Um, and when Inal mentioned this idea of the mirror, I think that fits very well what um, we as ethnomusicologists do very often. Um, we present a representation of other people's musical traditions, musical practices, but that mirror is not a mirror that shows things as they are. And I say this not to suggest that we are presenting a distorted image. No, I am saying that it's a refraction. It's something that comes from our own exposure, and And when we present it, we don't. Our purpose is not to replace what it is, but rather to bring a perspective that perhaps will create debate, will create um, an uncanny situation in which um, a foreign perspective, a different perspective, um, can illuminate or can show aspects of musical tradition or culture or a um, or a historical dimension of something that so often is not obvious for the people who live their own everyday life in that culture, in that place, or in that practice. Um, so, um, in this webinar, I will be drawing on my ethnomusicological research in Turkey. So, and my presentation explores the intersections of sound, spirituality, listening practices within Istanbul's musical and cultural landscape. So, and this session focuses on multimodal research approaches, the listening cultures I encountered, and the role of sound in both historical and contemporary traditions. So I organized my presentation following these numerals. So the introduction is this like field work and my musical work in Colombia, um, and the other two sections I talk about my academic and multimodal publications and the key concepts and ideas. So, um, so I'm from Colombia, and I can say that I can divide my fieldwork in these three specific periods. One initial preliminary work between 2005 and 2008. Um, I began my BA in anthropology in 2001, and I did anthropology of sound. Um, and my first time in Istanbul was in 2005. So I was able to travel, and I stayed for 2 months initially, and then I returned a year later. And between 2005 and 2008, I was always able to stay between 2 or 3 months in Istanbul. So I call this period like the first term of my fieldwork. Um, then between 2012 and 2016, I see it as my second period in which I was able to have my academic publications out. I did also a film, and then I took a pause, and that pause um, is connected with my beginning of my PhD, and I was not longer living in Colombia, so I moved to Philadelphia, and um, so my academic publications are now in the present. Um, I shifted from a more I shifted through a more um, less traditional approach to fieldwork. So I will be following these three different sections, these three different terms, as I introduce what I did during this periods of time. So when I moved to Istanbul for the first time in 2005, um, I joined a Sufi tour organized by a group that the name was Tumata, and Tumata was a group organized by Dr. Oruç Güvenç. Oruç Güvenç was a psychiatrist. He was also a violinist, and he had a group of um, therapists, musicians um, from Istanbul, from Turkey, but also from Europe, who were revitalizing a system of music therapy, or they were reviving a music therapy system that was applied um, during the late centuries of the Ottoman Sultanate in different regions, like Edirne and the same and Istanbul as well. So during this Sufi tour that happened in December, um, I joined activities. We were giving concerts, um, and we were visiting different shrines connected to different dervishes. We were visiting some um, tekkes that were turned into museums, and for me that was a introduction to a very specific form of Muslim spirituality or tasawwuf in Turkey. So in 2005, I already knew how to play the ney, um, and I started learning about um, Islamic mysticism, tasawwuf, Sufism before joining these activities. Um, the first time I found a ney flute, and the ney flute is gonna be um, a very important element because it's gonna work as um, like a thread that connects my field work with my academic work. So my first ney teacher was part of this group. She, Miriam Kiola, she was um, at that time she was a citizen from Uruguay. Nowadays, she is a Turkish citizen. She was doing music therapy sessions in Chile in a hospital, and she was the person who was like the representative of this group in Latin America. So when I started asking questions, when I started my interest in the ney flute, my first teacher, my first link person was Miriam. And she said, I met her in 2001. We started lessons. I started also learning about Islam. And I was, at that time, I was on my first years in my BA in anthropology. So during these years, I was preparing myself. I started learning Turkish with with um, electronic engineer who was from Turkey. He was living in Medellin. He was from Turkey. He was living in Medellin, and I started taking private lessons with him. So at 2005, I already had my own ney flute. At that time, I had my own ensemble. We were playing ilahis. Most of the repertoire were ilahis, and um, and I knew like few words, and I could communicate in Turkey. And I joined this Sufi tour. I met this group in person, and I started meeting musicians. And from that first field work, I was able to conduct interviews. I was able to meet people who were learning how to play the ney on on this specific group in Tumata. But I was also able to connect to the music conservatory at the Istanbul Technical University, and I started developing a relation with musicians, with this association, and then my fieldwork began um, to reach um, different people in Istanbul. So this is what I call the first term. Um, um, this first term reached a very important point when I was invited to present part of my work at ITU, at the musicology department. So Dr. Shervar Veshiroğlu and Recep Uslu, they were um, my points of contact with Turkish musicology, and for a long time um, I had like a very fluid communication with them. Um, they appreciated my interest um, in this field. That meant I was able to access articles in English, most of them, and yeah, I was able to present the preliminary findings of my own reflections of what I called at that time um, um, the hermeneutic experience of musical practice. So I started thinking about sound and aesthetics right from the early beginning of my fieldwork, and that's why um, I ended up paying a lot of attention to listening practices. I started asking questions why sound was important, the different ways in which people were listening to sounds or they were interpreting sounds, and um, rather than other aspects of musical practice. Um, so I was staying in Istanbul for 2 months, right? And then I will come back to Medellin. And of course, for me, Istanbul was a new place. I was learning, reading a lot about Istanbul, about this music. I was very new to aspects of the culture. Um, but I found a very strong connection, and I built a very strong connection. One of these connection with this ensemble um, that I created in Medellin. Um, so Hoja de Palma, or Palm Leaf, was was a group that I established since 2004, and we were learning the repertoire. As I said, we began with ilahis, and then we started um, performing charcular, also instrumental suites like Beshrev, Sasemaisi, and other forms of Turkish classical music, and also repertoire connected with tasawwuf, as I just mentioned. So I was doing a very traditional approach to ethnomusicology, in the sense that I was learning the language, I was learning um, some elements that were connected with the musical practice. My teacher was also very important. She played a very important role in that. But also, I was exploring this new music for me um, with Lina Maria and Clemencia. So Lina Maria was a singer, um, academically trained in the music conservatory in Medellin, and Clemencia was already a established musician. She played harp, and I was the only person that was not trained in the music conservatory. So when for us, Ojai Palma was a workshop, was a creative workshop in which we were exploring this new music. I was bringing um, scores. I was bringing all the conversations I had with um, my interlocutors, and um, we were trying to follow up. We were trying to um, play this music with all the details, with all the intention, with all the um, like bringing an interpretation that will come from our own experience, even though we were not um, from Istanbul, um, but we were doing listening sessions so that our interpretation will come in an honest way. So this group was very important because it also had like um, um, it has an existence in the city, right? So this was not something I did privately. No, we were playing concerts in Medellin. We were talking about um, tasawwuf music. We were um, giving a concert, introducing the lyrics of the ilahis. We were talking about the name of the composers, and we even performed. We even recorded two DVDs, like one DVD with didactic concerts we did, um, in which we were talking about the history of Turkish music and the instruments. And we produced two music releases. You see them on the screen right now. And yeah, we had quite visibility in Medellin. Um, so this um, um, this um, performative aspect of the ideas I was learning, of the conversations I was having with my interlocutors in Istanbul, um, play a very interesting role in my own work. Again, very pretty much connected with a very traditional way in which ethnomusicologists get closer or um, find ourselves attuned to the music we are studying, even though all this musical work in Medellin was completely separate from the everyday of musicians in Istanbul. And I will get there in a minute. Um, so this is what I see as this first term. Um, the second term relates to the academic publications I did about why about what I found um, during my fieldwork. Um, I published these two articles. The first one um, It's titled Training Kamish, Acoustic Ethnographies of Islam and Challenges of Sound in the Construction of Subjectivities. I published this in a journal of anthropology in Colombia. Um, this article, and I'm going to talk about the article in detail in the second in the second part of my presentation. But what I want to say for now is that right from the beginning, something that grabbed my attention from the musicians I found in Istanbul were the intensity and the, like how focused they were in the production of sound and in the way in which musicians were making sense of their own sound. So this um, this this personal attention, this almost devotional interest in their sound and the way in which they were performing um, invited me to think about music and to theorize about music in a way in which was quite different from many readings about Islam I was having in anthropology. Um, in Islam, in which music was seen with with suspicion, texts in which Islam seemed to be hostile to music. Um, when I when I started talking with these musicians, music was something different, or this sound making was something completely different, was something that would allow them to even understand way better their own devotion. So I started writing about that. I started writing and developing concepts in which we could make a acoustic ethnography of Islam, meaning a way in which we could write a ethnographic description of Islam from the way in which people were paying attention to sounds and a way in which sound was playing a special role in community life. So, um, so I wrote about that. And I was also interested in how sound was playing a very important, um, like how sound was determining the construction of subjectivities. So that was something that fascinated me. And on the other side, I also knew that there were a lot of challenges in terms of policy, in terms of history, regarding the places where musicians were trained into these instruments before the Turkish Republic was established. So during my first visits in Istanbul, I learned about the tekkes, like the life of these places, how these places were in certain time of history. They were vibrant. They were very special places. Then the places went through a very dramatic and interesting transformation. Um, I started learning about um, a previous coup that happened in the 80s, and a lot of social and political dynamics that situated Sufi music practice in a very special tension with the everyday practice of people living in Istanbul. So um, again, my exposure to Sufi music, to the to how to play the ney, um, was not only this delightful experience, but also was this very rich, grounded, and difficult history in which musicians and some music teachers felt displaced by the social order. Of course, all of this is about 2005, 2006, and Istanbul was very different at that time. Um, so even though the article was published in 2014, um, academic publication moves very slow. Um, but when I went to Istanbul in 2005 and I started going back and forth, um, I saw a face of Istanbul that is no longer there. Um, I will say that another aspect, very important aspect, and I'm gonna talk about the film, and I will make a pause here, so that we can have in all a more Q&A session right here. Um, when I started, um, when I moved to the U.S. to start my PhD, um, that included, of course, my research in Istanbul. Um, one day I was um, preparing an article about um, manuscripts of music theory. Um, in my approach to this musical tradition, um, the work of historians was very strong, and I was exposed to music theory books written in Osmanlija, um, and there were a lot of diagrams, like similar to all the circles. That's why I choose this place for this presentation today. Um, Music theory books were full of rounded like diagrams, and those diagrams were used to explain how rhythmic circles work, or how the rhythmic circles were represented. And I was reading about that. I was very motivated. And one day, one of my colleagues said to me in the PhD, like, "Hey, this paper sounds very interesting, but I think that maybe a few people will read it." And I said, like, "Hey, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, um, it's very specialized. It's too specialized, and maybe your audience will be very narrow." Um, so that comment hit me very hard, and I said, "Okay, what about finding a different way to present and to explore this interest in which the audience may be bigger?" And I decided to make a film. So I paused writing the paper, and I decided to work on a film that was Rehabi type timekeepers. And the film is available on internet. Um, the music releases of Ojai Palma are also available on SoundCloud. You can listen to them. Um, but in with this film, I was able um, to present some of my interlocutors that I had for more than 4 or 5 years on the screen, right? So um, I created a story that was inspired by Ahmed Tanpinar's novel about time and clocks, the Institute of Time at the time Institute in Istanbul, and Rehavi then comes to a very important period in my research, but also um, I was shooting Rehavi in 2016 when the attempted coup happened in Istanbul. That event also signaled a transition into my work, my ethnomusicological work in Istanbul. Um, I finished the film, I showed the film in Istanbul, and I took a pause. And I decided to have like yeah, like a few years in which I was not as active as I was um, for very personal reasons. Um, so, um, um, so Inal, what about having this Q&A um, intermission right here? How do you see
Okay.
the audience?
Let's see if we have some questions from the students first.
Okay,
Do you guys want to ask something? Do you have anything?
let me go back to.
I can ask you about the Hoja, the Palma ensemble. Um,
Yes.
it, yeah, I mean, you said you recorded DVDs and have releases. What happened to this band? Like, is it's not active, is it?
No, it's not active um, because the group was based in Medellin, and I left Medellin in after I finished my BA in 2011. Sorry, yes, yeah, 2011. I moved to Bogota, and I was no longer with them. But in Bogota, I created another ensemble, um, and I kept performing in Bogota. Paroja Palma, um, yes, I have a lot of nostalgia.
Okay.
Uh, it was so amazing. It was really nice. Yeah, then I moved to Bogota and I created another ensemble. Of course, Bogota music scene was more vibrant, I will say, that Medellin. We performed at music festivals. There was also like a sacred music festival, a world music festival. Um, um, but yes, I haven't had the chance um, to perform with Lina and Clemencia again. I hope I will.
Thank you. Um, so before this fascination with the studying the music of well, last week you talked about the Colombian music and like the Colombian Amazon indigenous music, and that came after the
Yes.
fascination. So that's an interesting bit for me. So um, you were initially not as interested,
Mm.
and then you were fascinated by the Turkish music. Quite a remote region, like when you think about it. Uh,
Yeah.
well, it reminds me of this, in this 19th century exotism. It's like the fascination with the other, especially
Yes.
especially the Eastern cultures.
Yes.
Um, well, you walked us through the introduction of the phases, but I'm curious about what was the initial spark? Like when, what moment, what is, or is there such a moment?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Um, the first time I heard the ney sounds, um, I f- I felt at home. I was in a meditation retreat, and I felt at home completely. Um, and it was, yeah, there was a weird a weird feeling. Um, as I said, I didn't have a formal training as a musician. I didn't went to a music conservatory. I tried my best, but I failed multiple times to be like to get in. Um, yeah, getting into the music conservatory in Medellin was a very challenging task. So I started taking music lessons. Um, I started um, I started double bass lessons um, in an after school program. Um, but I was looking for my instrument. I was looking for like a sound. And when I heard that sound, I said, "Wow, that's it." And but of course, it was a recording, um, and and the person with the recording said, "Well, this recording is from Istanbul. Um, it was an LP from Istanbul." Later on, I learned that the recording was made in New York. um, um, During the 70s, um, the um, the Galata Mevlevi ensemble was invited to New York to record that LP, and so Akak Gündüz, um, um, I think Salih Bilgin were the prominent nays and featured on that LP. Um, and I heard I listened to that LP in the house of um, one of my anthropology professors. He had a very extensive collection of records, and I listened to that record, and that was like, uh, yeah, that was very nice. And of course, but then um, a friend of mine was living in Paris, and she was able to find the first ney flute in Paris, and I started trying to play the ney, and then I met this professor, this teacher, and so it was a very like a personal journey, also to get this to get to know this professor. She was living in Chile. I organized a music therapy retreat in Medellin, so she came and she stayed with my family, and that's how I get to learn this. This is 2001, and she said, "One day, hopefully, you will come to Istanbul, and I'm going to introduce my teacher, and you will introduce my other friends in Istanbul." So, so that was the first moment. I was able to find that sound. I started reading about what is a Mevlevi group, what is music and Sufism, and I was so motivated. And when she mentioned, "Hey, let's go to Istanbul," I started. I was a juggler at that time, so I was earning money to be able to go to Istanbul. And in 2005, I went to Istanbul with my first release of the CD, like my first CD in hand. And I said, "Hey, merhaba." Of course. Um, Now I can laugh about this. Now I can talk about this. But at that time was, yeah, my whole life was to be able to stay there. My plan was to do my BA at Miam because, of course, it was connected to with E2, um, but because of many situations, um, I my time in Istanbul then shifted, right? I I ended up living in Philadelphia and distancing myself also from Istanbul, and I think my scholarship um, in the present, because I kept working after living in Cyprus, also shifted enormously, um, because then I was able to gain a perspective I was missing, um, which I hope we will have chance to talk about it.
Um, yeah, I actually have a question about that, but shall we maybe proceed with your talk and then have it, or would you like to have it now?
Um, well, if there are any question, yeah, from the
Yes,
audience, yeah.
we have one here. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for this. Um, as we talked about this exotism, and I really see that you're not sort of looking this music into the perspective of like Orientalist perspective, so like not like as a way point of view, but really into the its world, its um, social aspects and everything. And I'm really curious about the theoretical side of the music. So um, as you talked about the rhythmic cycles, I assume they are usuls,
Yes.
usuller. So how about the theory in terms of pitch? As you mentioned, the change in tech gas and the system and everything. And I believe that there are many different ways of looking at theory of Turkish makam music. So how do you approach that from someone from Colombia who learned in this process the music?
Yes. So I began learning ney through the mesh system. This is great, but it's also very limiting, because I was able to get to know my teacher very closely, um, but because my teacher was my only main source, and of course I was working very slowly, because I was able to go. As I said, I only stayed for 2 months, and then come back to Colombia. Um, my progress was very slow. Um, so um, so I can say that nowadays my sound is good, but my repertoire is not that extensive because of that very reason. So I learned like the maqams and the repertoire that my teacher was teaching me through Meshk. And Meshk is a very slow learning process, right? So I was able to play the repertoire, um, but I never had the chance to take, let's say, Maqam 101 course in let's say at E2. When I went to E2 multiple times, I had the chance to talk to Suleiman Erguner and to sound record him performing a Peshrev. That Peshrev, I will go back to Colombia and I will play that Peshrev, the same Peshrev, for months, right? Because that's how it works, and of course my ears will be able to recognize nuances, like where to breathe and how to perform, um, following that type of advice. So, so my interest in usul um, came from this exposure to music theory books, right? So, a friend of mine gifted me a kudum, so I started playing kudum and bendira at the same time. as I was also singing and learning Turkish, and um, and I was like playing, like learning how to play usul with my hands. I was doing all those exercises and doing the solfege of every song I will learn, right? So again, um, like from today's perspective, um, that's very slow, right? Um, but again, it was also my opportunity to go deeper into sound and into have a better appreciation of this. Um, I'm glad you mentioned this issue about exoticism. Um, um, when I was reading Edward Said, and Edward Said for my dissertation was very important. I was coming from Colombia, um, and my positionality was quite different. Um, when I went to Istanbul in 2008 to read my paper, um, I asked, they gave me a translator, like, um, yeah, a simultaneous interpreter. Um, and the first person who was designed for me to do that job, um, the person refused to do it because the person said, you cannot deliver a talk about Turkish tasawwuf music because you are not a Turk. And then yeah, that was very shocking. And then they changed the person, and another person was my translator. Um, so I did my best to avoid or to question any form of exoticism um, applied to Turkish music or applied to Sufism in particular. And that's something I would like um, to talk in detail as I continue my presentation. If that's okay, I don't know if in the back students have any other questions so that we can continue. No?
I think, yeah, you can continue with the
Okay,
presentation.
so let's continue. So wait a minute. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Doo-doo-doo. Okay.
Ne var? Ne dersi? Juan,
FM.
most of the students have a class in 10 minutes because we started an hour late.
Yeah.
So this is the situation right now. How can we use this time? Would you like to wrap it up or have some questions?
I'm gonna.
Or maybe we can continue. They will leave. We can continue because this is live also. So I guess that's what we should do. Yeah, let's continue.
Okay. Good. So so Rehavi. I'm not gonna spoil the film. You can find the film and watch it. And this was the review from the from the Society of Cultural Anthropology. Um, so my film critiques the Turkish government's new Ottoman ideology that presses traditional Sufi practices, magic accepted, into nationalistic service, killing these arts in the process. So all these understandings are fitted into the world of the watch. Again, the film is about a watch. Um, so, like a talisman, Rehavi intervenes in the order of space-time in a prayerful way in order to bring about targeted changes in the contemporary world. Um, so Rehavi also, as I said, was pivotal as I was able to articulate this um, fieldwork, ethnographic, ethnomusicological encounters with these people, and my interest in um, making this critique of a um, very different ideology, and of course, all the diagrams and more theoretical aspects of this music system that I found interesting. Um, so later, um, when I started living in Philadelphia, and when I took a pause from my trips to Istanbul, um, I published two works. One was called Experiments on New Organology and Performing Research in a Multimedial Exhibit. And the other is a more historiographical piece. It's called Ottoman Muslim Musicians Drifting Through the Tanzimat Era, From Beggars to Freed Laborers. So what I want to highlight from the experiments of new organology is that I found a collection of ney instruments in Philadelphia at the Penn Museum, at the Museum of the University of Pennsylvania. And I started working with that collection. I did like musical, like tonal analysis of the instruments. I was doing like historiographic approach to the instruments, like why do they have these instruments, where do they come from, who donated the instruments, and I use installation to explore my approach to this ney flutes, right? So I developed this installation. Sarah Frischmuth was a female collector of musical instruments from the 18th century. She was very wealthy, living in Philadelphia, and she was collecting musical instruments from around the world. And she donated these instruments to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and then they came, and from that museum, they came to the Museum of the university. They were brought for educational purposes, and I created this exhibit in 2020 during the pandemic. I also then did a more artistic approaches to the instrument, not more like I stopped doing this historiography of the instruments, like this archaeology of the instruments. I wanted to do more creative. So here in the image of the center, you see that there is like a transparency between the two instruments. These ney flutes were acquired in Egypt, and the skin of the instruments have diagrams, they have drawings, and and for me that was very special because the neys, most of the neys that you find in Istanbul nowadays, they don't have inscriptions. Sometimes they have calligraphy, like a little bit. You will read Ya Mevlana or something like that, or who, but rarely you will see um, a duck, a moon, or all these very interesting diagrams that I found on the nays. And a recent version of that same installation was on display in Villanova University, in which again I was um, I was able to um, um, contact my, like, the person who opened, or the person who made the instruments I played in Istanbul, um, and um, I provided him um, the measurements of these instruments, and he made um, a new set following the same measurements, and I have been playing these instruments um, since then. Um, so I would like to finish um, highlighting what I see as some of the key concepts and ideas that come from my work. So from this 2012 article, um, which acoustic ethnographies of Islam, I would say that sound helps individuals to shape their interiority. So I will say, very general, um, that assertions about the permissibility of music in Islam do not define religious belief. Quite on the contrary, these ideas reveal the underlying tension between aspects of subjectivity, learning processes of devotional praxis expressed in and through sound. Islam is a very sonic experience of the divine. Recitation, ways in which a person align themselves to pronounce words, um, verses or understandings that comes from auditory inputs, and place sounds and sound itself in a very interesting dimension. And and um, theorists and writers of sound within Islam from an aesthetic dimension, I think, is very, very, very important. So the teaching and practice of music in Muslim spirituality have more elements inherited from a long esoteric tradition than from a theological discussion interested in settling or competing for the norms of religiosity. This can sound defined for a more um, um, modern version of Islam that emphasizes belief rather than the aesthetic practices it helped to flourish. Um, there is also this concept of acoustic ethnographies of Islam, meaning that this can be understood as an anthropology of sound and examines specific ways in which listening practices impact subjectivity construction by revealing the connection between Muslim spirituality and music education, as well as the relationship between teacher-student interaction based on the continuity of representations concerning the liturgical use of sound objects and the auditory perspective on how they sound. So that's why I think when we um, when we can do an ethnography of meshk, meaning we can study that practice and we can learn a lot of things that happened to that practice, rather than thinking of meshk as this repetitive action in which you are just copying another person's movement. In this back and forth, it's also the moment where different worlds of listening, different sounds can come into fruition. So that's another concept that comes from my work. And this, I think, is what I was able to understand from Dene, and something that I call the non-mastering way of knowing. And I use this non-mastering way of knowing from Laura Marx, is a theorist, in which it's a form of knowing that you practice and you get better of it, but you don't master what you do. You remain open, right? So learning to play the ney flute is experienced as a method of sonic subjectification when performers, held by teachers, are paradoxically stripped from their intrinsic quality, their sound. What does it mean? That there is a moment in which, in this intense and intimate practice with the instrument, the performer gets to realize that the instruments themselves don't emit any sound. They are able to listen to many other things, right? So the empty reed, the ney, exemplifies in music mysticism this idea of a human being that is perfectly ready to receive this vital breath that passes through them without retaining or taking possession of that breath, right? So we can see this as the contemporary fascination with sound that people that plays analog synthesizers have with the realization of sound. Ney is a very old instrument, and I found this very interesting because they were getting into modular synthesis with, of course, very few sounds, very few variations, just one modulation maybe, um, um, but they were able to experience that. This idea of having a very rich sonic and listening experience from very minimal elements. So this is something I think I learned from the ney and from my research in Istanbul. Now, this of course sounds very nice, profound, but also something that I've learned from my research in Istanbul is that teaching ney in Istanbul is also to be in between this really difficult task of drifting between secularism and ethnicity, right? Um, so I will say that in nowadays context, um, Muslim like activities of Muslim spirituality that are related to music, they have been permitted. They also are funded. They are not persecuted because they are harmless to the social order, and because they have become an ethnic and a cultural activities mainly, right? So they were commodified, harmless, interesting, or boring, or whatever. They were commodified by this market, and ceased to have this power, this amusement, this possibility to pause the entire world and to have this contemplation or this fana or um, this way of engaging with the reality of the self in a different ways. So, however, it is at the level of teachers and students where sporadically the atmosphere of a sonic spirituality can be experienced and witnessed in the skin of practitioners and audiences. Um, and also, and I think this is my last idea, yes, um, my work is an approach to Sufi music practice from its places of teaching. Um, and this is my last big idea. So with the creation of the Turkish state at the beginning of the 20th century, that began a spatial secularization of Ottoman places intended to amend or to transform the social ties between people, redirecting those cultivated loyalties between the sonic and spiritual scenery toward academic agreements, promoted within the new places for music learning within the Turkish state of the 19th century. So this process generated practices of resistance and struggles that are still unresolved as teachers and students seek to reposition themselves in the contemporary context of Istanbul. This means that for many years, Ottoman places, and by Ottoman places I mean places where people were going to learn how to play the instruments. It can be a tekke, a derga, or a mevlevihane, but also shrines, but also other places in which people can take a baraka, or places in which people can feel in their skin something that is transcendental, something that not only religious but transcendental. All those places were deeply transformed, but but all of that created even more problems because people's skin have all those wounds. And when people go to some places and they listen to something or they feel something, it's like as if the spirit or the soul or the skin, a very old skin, feel um, like the feeling or feel the presence of a bigger notion of the self. Um, and that's how I see the relation between music practice as a way of place making. Um, that is, again, not only related to Islam or to Sufism, but it's a practice that musicians have. Musical practice produces spaces in which people live, and those spaces are at the same time a physical space and a personal space. So that's my thank you slide and my last big idea that I would like to share with you today.
Thank you, Juan. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you very much.
I have quite a few questions. I'll try to order them. I mean, just one observation. I have many questions, but just one observation. You very carefully avoided these terms like East, Middle Eastern, Far East. Like you always said, like Islam, Muslim, Turkey,
Yeah.
and that was probably intentional. I don't know. I'm just asking, and because sometimes we always, I don't know, like the Western world is like this default state, and everything is in relation to either East or West,
Yes.
according to that. Was that an intentional choice on your
Yes,
part? Okay,
yes, yeah,
okay.
because it was very interesting. I don't come from, maybe if I studied anthropology in Paris, I will probably I will say Middle Eastern.
Okay. Yes.
but yeah, I came from a non-imperial
Mm-hmm.
based for my scholarship. I came from Colombia, so it
Yeah.
was right from the beginning. My subject position was very different, and I was trying to work with a less like a, let's say, more precise category. That, of course, when I arrived to Cyprus, my category was no longer as precise as I thought. Right. Um, so, but
There's all.
in my last piece, I talk about Ottoman Muslim musicians, right? Because before I was talking about Ottoman musicians, but now I was talking about Ottoman Muslim musicians, right? So even more specific.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, well, just yesterday I was in Vienna and I visited a cathedral, like it's called St. Stephen's Cathedral. And inside I went and there was music playing, organ and choir. And of course, we had music education. Of course, it was not the first time that I've been to a cathedral, but of course, we studied the music of this, I don't know, like the Middle Ages, like organ music and stuff. It's one thing to listen them on spot, on online or elsewhere, let's say, but it's another thing that you're there inside that space, and that particular location, that I felt you, the same. You said like transcendental,
Yes. Transcendental. Yeah.
transcendental. I felt that moment, and I think
Good.
that I think that
Sorry. Sorry. Sorry you felt that way.
why is that?
No, it's a joke. I mean,
Okay.
because accepting feeling a transcendental feeling is problematic in the sense that just it that goes beyond you.
Hmm.
Um, that alters your sense of space. It alters your own dimension, and we are trained to be very contained. We are trained to know where we are. Um, um, but when you have this transcendental experience, you're shaken. Your ground is shaken by
That's true.
something by by something else,
Hmm.
by something else that comes from sometimes from nowhere, right?
And it's not in your control. You feel
It's
out of
not
control.
right, right.
Yes.
It's not in your control, and of course, um, we fear that because violence have been also done that way. Um, but when but when you feel that through, let's say, a secure, a not secure, but like what is the word? A gentle um, um, experience, your relation with music and sound change completely, and the sense of community, it's also different.
Hmm.
even time and history changes when you have that experience, right?
Yes. Um, intense stuff.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Of course.
So, yeah, as you talked about the um, like closure of tekkes and the 20th century, like the way um these places were treated because of it was after the war and everything, and there was this nationalistic ideas back then, and I'm very like in my own research as well, I was very curious about the sort of different points on music at that time. You know, there was this side like Ziya Gökalp, very nationalist thinking of music. The other side was more Turkish makam musicians and like ney players. So with all these, like with all these continuity of these things, how do you think about the future of ney music or Mevlevi music right now,
Yeah.
as we talked about through this? Yeah.
Initially, I was very optimistic, um, because I remember the Darul Elhan as that amazing project.
Yeah, me too.
So yes, and that's the last piece I published in Yega Musicology Journal. So in all, there was an idea of like an imperial school of music that was meant to be an Kadikyo, if I am not mistaken. So the Darul Elhan will have master musicians from the different millets, and they will have this space, and they will have Armenians, they will have Greeks, they will have um, um, Ottoman Turks teaching, right, this music from outside the palace. So that was the Darul Elhan, and it was such a project, but then of course didn't work, um, and it was like dismantled. Um, so in at the beginning, I thought that maybe that will happen, meaning rebuilding the Darul Elhan will happen, but I didn't. So the music conservatory was established during the 70s, right? And TRT was established also during that time. And TRT and E2 initially, they were like the pillars of this um, Tursanat Museum type kind of institution, right? Um, but of course was fragmented, right? You don't when you listen to the recordings by um, Kani Karaja and Aka Gündüz and all these nice stories they have with other Jewish singers and Armenian singers, and or when they talk about Armenian composers, all of that is gone, right? Um, for many reasons. So the the point in time when I departure from my scholarly interest was was when I started thinking about these cultural centers playing a role, and it was at that time in which municipalities began to open NAY courses. I don't remember the name right now, but um, suddenly a lot of NAY courses, a lot of online places for NAY teaching, um, There was also a person who built the first ney using a plastic tube, like a PVC tube, and that just it went beyond, right? It was just like again like an overdeveloped um, plan of massive construction, and I was just lost. Honestly, I was completely lost. Um, um, and I couldn't. And of course, so that happened on one direction. And another direction, you saw the government funding of rebuilding and revitalizing the techies, and that's another story.
Yeah.
And you see that in Cyprus. You see that in Lefkosia. Um, and I
So,
will say, sorry, go ahead.
sorry. So in a way, as you said, it became like a commodity rather than
Yes,
continuity, right?
yes, yeah. And I say unfortunate because of the speed, right? Um, because in that pace, um, you have some managerial decisions taking from, again, a metropolitan center rather from a location, right? Which is unfortunate, but it's again, that's why instead of me taking a political stand, I decided to study this phenomena through the urban transformation of Istanbul, because I didn't want to be cut off in a in an argument saying no, I oppose this because something. No, I wanted to have a more like another opinion from urban studies approach, in which you have all this development, like a massive development. Um, Sometimes you don't know if people are playing well. Sometimes you don't know if mesh is working. No, you have a lot of instruments. You need to sell them, even if they are precious, handmade, but you just need to circulate them. So you have a lot of Kamish from Hatay, and they go and circulate. But yeah, the accent is put in on a different part of the chain, right? If you want to use that word. Um, yeah, my last piece was about that. Was about like not that specifically, but sometimes when you are a scholar and you want to make a point about what is going on right now, maybe you save your head writing about a previous historical moment.
Yeah. Rather than
So
today.
yeah, so I did that, writing about the moment when teches were closed at the beginning of the 20th century, but musicians were teaching ney in other spaces, and they stopped being beggars in the traditional sense, and they began to work as freed laborers, right? Because before they were in a teke, so the agreement of teaching how to play the ney um, was understood differently, right? When you start working in a university, when you start being paid by yeah, the monetization of the social tide changes a lot of things, right? And that's why many people in Istanbul, I'm not saying everyone, but Sufi music lost a lot of audience because they said, well, they play very well, but we don't know if they're dervishes. In their feeling as they perform, and people were accustomed to these musicians. They knew the difference between someone just gigging and someone performing. People knew it, right? So that created a separation between an audience that maybe are not necessarily religious, but they will appreciate musicians putting their roof in their practice, even if they're, again, regardless of um, like a hardcore religious obedience, right? And I think with this flux of money and the promotion and the touristic celebration of um, Ottoman Muslim musicians, it's always a risk, right? Um, but here we go. Yeah.
Juan,
Hey, I'm very glad our
uh,
conversation.
yes, yes, me too. We are actually running out of time, but I have one final question.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, I have just one final question. I know that some of your research is based around or like influenced by decolonization, and of course, when we think about decolonization in the context of Cyprus, some people believe that one colonial power left and another one came. Um, and so, based around your experience in Cyprus, a year and a half, I think, something
Yeah.
like that, what were your observations regarding your previous knowledge of Turkey and their culture? As far as I remember, after Turkey, you left to Philadelphia, and from there you came to Cyprus, not directly from Turkey. Is that right?
Yes, correct. That's correct.
So yeah, just give us some overview of what were your observations of Cyprus within this decolonized or let's say still colonized region,
Yeah.
and also yeah maybe tie it with the music as well.
Yes. So I was accustomed to think about Istanbul as um, as an imperial capital without having in the back of my mind the price for being the capital. That means I never thought about Istanbul from the edges. I was always thinking about Istanbul from within. So when I came to Cyprus, um, it was my opportunity to see the empire from a border. And that flipped a lot of things. Um, there were many accounts I was able to read about um, Nathan Tevfik, um, who was. Um, I learned that the Ottoman Sultan, like the subjects that the Ottoman Sultan couldn't kill, they will send them out of the capital. Um, I understood that while living in Cyprus. And that changed my positionality in a very dramatic way that I'm slowly being able to put into words. So this was one a very, very first thing. The second thing was to think about Turkish, like the language, not as a identity marker, but as a regional lingua franca of exchanges. That's still blowing up my mind, because Turkish, at least in Istanbul, in the Istanbul I knew, Turkish, the language was a marker of identity, was not a lingua franca. But in Cyprus, I experienced Turkish as a lingua franca, like something that happens regionally, as a part of a long history of exchange, right? Identity claims is a very it's part of it's a very recent phenomena. It's a very I mean it comes with it comes with the state, right? And but when you have people living throughout language without embodying identification processes, you have a different understanding of what a language is, right? So so that's like those two things really shaken. Yeah, they change a lot of things on my thinking about music in Istanbul, and music and Mevlevi music in particular, right? So that's why when I joined the school and I knew about the Lefkosha Mevlevi Hane, I started putting together some ideas and thoughts to conduct interviews, and to ask questions about the afterlife of that place, especially because the Lefkosha Teke didn't close in the 20s as happened in Istanbul. The close remained open because they weren't seen as a threat. In Istanbul, they were seen as a threat, but in Lefkosha was very different. Was very, 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 very different. Yeah. So I wanted to know. I wanted to know more about that, and I put together like a research, like a small research project. Well, you know that story now better than me. Hopefully, one day we will be able to continue that.
It's still on the news
Yes.
somewhere.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. But yeah, before leaving, um, I was able to have like an initial conversation with a grandson of the last Mevlevi Sheikh of the Lefkosha Teke, and that was quite an encounter. Yeah. So they said, "Well, we can continue the conversation when you come back." you know how you are.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, hopefully I will be able to continue that.
Yeah, maybe that's another reason for you to have a
Yes,
visit.
of course, of course. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Juan, so nice to talk with you again today. Could you give us a very brief teaser of what to expect next week? Because
Yes.
that's gonna be the final meeting with you in this series, let's say.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. Next week, I will be talking about my more recent project. It's a sound sculpture, a sound installation that I began working in Cyprus. Um,
Yes.
so, yeah, it's called Tears for a Noble Peasant. So it's a sculpture I started developing with my students of organology one, and that has to do with the sounds of rural Cyprus and sheeps and wind. So yeah,
We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
that's good. That's good.
Thanks again, Juan. We'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.